Identity and acceptance. How does a person go from Irish Catholic in Philadelphia to Orthodox Jew in Jerusalem? My next guest describes himself as the firstborn son of a manic depressive Italian woman and a pathologically silent Irishman. He converted from Catholic to progressive Judaism, then to conservative Judaism, and now is a hybrid of a modern Orthodox and traditionally observant. As a comedian, his onstage humor pokes fun at his big black hat, frock coat, and Hasidic side curls. Offstage, he brings thoughtful insight into modern living, religion, and culture. And today, he's going to share his layers of identity and journey of acceptance, self-acceptance, community acceptance, and heavenly. Born to be funny, circumcised 3 times, best friends with his beard, Yisrael Campbell. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Meredith. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
I think you really have earned the BFF badge with your beard. It's very impressive. How many years in the making is this?
It's a good 10. It's a good 10. I fear that I want to stand back a little so you can see all of it. I fear that it's not growing as quickly as it used to.
Well, I'm sure there's some kind of oil or something you can add to accelerate.
Yes, of course there are supplies, and of course there are, condiments for the beard.
Condiments. I love that, beard condiments. Well, I think your journey of self-acceptance starts kind of where all of ours does, in high school. You got into a hit-and-run accident with a priest?
Yes, with a Catholic priest. I made a brave and daring getaway, and he caught me about less than 10 minutes later. I had faded into oncoming traffic. I was drunk and I was high, and I was. They don't make them anymore, but I was high on Quaaludes, and I was smoking what I describe as a 6-foot bong. But the physics of it seems improbable now as an adult. But I was. Let's just say I was otherworldly in my chemical use that night. And he caught me, and he said, he asked me if I'd been drinking. I said, no, Father, I wasn't thinking. He told me he was a priest. I started crying because it felt like, God had sent one of his hitmen to get me. And it was. I met with a group of people the next morning, and I have been clean and sober ever since, over 41 years.
Wow, that's really impressive. Prior to that, was the drug and alcohol use in high school a pretty normal thing, or was that night just an abnormal occurrence?
No. It had become a very normal thing. It had become the way I dealt with life. I definitely was using chemicals to treat how I felt and how I responded to life, and it was working for the longest time.
This meeting is being recorded.
I know people that use for decades, and I used for 7 years start to finish. But for me, in my life, it was what I needed to get by.
And I think it's funny that you were, when you got caught by the priest, that you felt like God had caught you, because you've mentioned in other interviews, or maybe in some of your stand-up, that you were Catholic enough to know that you were going to hell.
Right.
You said that your aunt was a nun and your mom went to a convent after college but was suspicious of the Pope. So how Catholic does that make you exactly?
So I always, right, as you said, I always say I was Catholic enough to know I was going to hell. In other words, like I didn't have like a working relationship with God as a kind of source of power in my life. But whenever I did something wrong, I looked up in the air and I said, sorry, just in case, And after college, my mother had gone to the convent. She stayed 1 year, which is after a year, you're called a novice for the first year. And then after the first year, you have to kind of recommit. And she said no. She was not willing to recommit. And so she left. But her sister was a nun, which I always say, when I'm bragging, I say that makes Jesus my uncle, because she's a bride of Christ. She's my aunt. He's my uncle. It's church doctrine, but I only mention that in Jerusalem for parking. It doesn't.
Oh, I don't know.
It doesn't get me far, but at the Scottish church, I park like that. I just say, I'm the nephew, and they let me right in. So.
I think it sounds like you have an in several communities, but we'll be talking about that in a minute. You converted to Judaism initially when you were in LA for pilot season?
Yeah, I went out to LA. Right. You're very good. You're very good for you are curious. I went to LA. I went to drama school in New York. When I first finished high school, like 99.9% of my friends were going directly to college, whether it was a local state university or some, slightly more acclaimed university. And I just knew that at 18 months sober, and I knew that most of them were going to drink. They were going to drink freely without their parents breathing down their neck. And I knew that it wasn't time or place for me to go to college at that point. So I had met some sober people who were living in Florida, and I moved down there and I started building a life. And then after a few years of that, I went back to Philadelphia and then on to New York City to go to drama school. And when I got out of drama school, I went out to LA to become a famous actor, which isn't exactly what happened, but that's where I found Judaism.
And how did that come about? How does one just, especially as a Catholic, find Judaism? Was it through friends, or you were curious yourself and just began reading things?
So I had, I knew I wasn't a Catholic, and I wouldn't be a Catholic today, even if I, hadn't converted to Judaism. It just didn't resonate for me. It didn't speak to me. I had tried other Christian churches even, growing up as a Catholic, we thought we were the best and everybody else was less than. Part of the recovery process was finding a power greater than myself by which I could live. The idea is that I'm powerless over drugs and alcohol. My life is unmanageable, right? So I need a power. And so I'd been seeking, now that had started when I was 16, and I'd been seeking any number of, if somebody had an interesting concept of God or an interesting spiritual practice, I was willing to try it. And I just hadn't found something that really resonated for me. And I was at another place in my life where I was like, I've got to find something that resonates for me, and because I saw a lot of things that resonated for other people, but they didn't resonate for me. So, and I had read some books about, I'd read Exodus by Leon Uris, which is a kind of, they call it historical fiction. It's a kind of school of writing where, he couches a story in historical fact, but he adds fictional characters to make it more interesting for everyone. And that book had really grabbed my attention. And I'd read, Holocaust literature by Elie Wiesel and Primo Levi, and these memoirs of men and women who had survived the Holocaust, and I was just trying to survive having grown up in the suburbs. You know what I mean? It hardly seemed like it was on par with the Holocaust, but on some level I thought, well, if they could survive this, then I can survive it. If they could survive life, I could survive life. But of course we don't want to just survive life. We want to kind of thrive in our lives. And so I had this idea. It was my idea. It wasn't anybody else's, that you couldn't convert to another religion. I don't know where I got it. I just, I have a bad habit of kind of grabbing a hold of an idea and being convinced that it's true and never pushing against it. A dear friend of mine tells a story that he has baby elephant beliefs. And what he means is that when a baby elephant is being chained, they put a cuff on its leg and they chain it to a tree, and it pulls and pulls and pulls and pulls until it's convinced that when it's on its leg, it can't pull the chain and it can't get away. And for the rest of its life, they put the cuff on its leg, they put a relatively short length of chain on a relatively short stake, they drive the stake into the ground, and once the chain tightens, the elephant stops pulling. Even though the elephant could walk away if it just simply kept pulling, right? And it doesn't keep pulling. And so my guy would say that he had 328,285 baby elephant beliefs. And those are things we believe to be true, which simply are not true. But because we never push back against them, we never find out they're not true. Mm-hmm. So So, on that level of acceptance, that's what I had to accept was first and foremost that I was an alcoholic and a drug addict, that I couldn't safely use alcohol and drugs, and that I needed a power greater than myself by which I could live. And that's what that search was. And when it finally landed in Judaism, I had been searching for about almost 14 years. I had started when I was 16, and I was about 31 when I first converted to Judaism.
Wow. Some people, you talk about ideas that are baby elephants, and certainly how we view ourselves can be that way too. When it comes to changing identity, some people, or even just like a career, some people feel really lost after that change, or really crazy, and they start to just question everything. They feel like they're losing it. Did you ever have that feeling like, what am I doing? Have I lost it?
I feel like, primarily I'm one step behind you. Have I lost it? I'm back in the will I ever find it stage of life. I mean, I've gone through some tremendous changes in life, and some days I get up and think, God, I haven't done anything with my life. I haven't gone anywhere. You know what I mean? And then I have to stop and say, wait a second. You live in another country. You belong to another religion. You have a different passport. You claim a new national origin. You changed your name. You changed your religion. I have to kind of go, oh right, I have. But it's definitely a challenge. For me, it's a challenge. It's a challenge each and every day to bring the energy I want to my life. And some days I'm better at it than others. And, that's the challenge. And that's what I use the people in my life for. That's what I use my prayer life for. And that's what I use, my sober friends for, and, all the things, finding all the things that give me strength.
And as far as, identity, it doesn't, when I've watched other interviews that you've done, and, I've listened to other things that you've been a part of, and certainly talking to you now, it doesn't feel like you're pretending to be anybody else. You're not a caricature. You seem very, very authentic, and very American. But as you said, you changed your nationality. So I'm curious, as far as identity and self-acceptance is kind of concerned, how American do you feel, and how Israeli do you feel?
It's funny. So first of all, right before I came to Israel for the first time, I heard a man speak. He was at a concert, and he was raising money for a religious institution. And he said that he was, the term is Oleh Hadash, a new Oleh. The idea of making Aliyah, which means literally to go up, is what the way people talk about moving to Israel. Like it's an ascension. Jerusalem itself is in the mountains. And so you ascend to Jerusalem, you make Aliyah to Jerusalem. And so, but spiritually, it's thought to live in the land of Israel is a better, spiritual thing for a Jew than living outside the land of Israel. So you ascend to that. And he said, I've been in Israel 44 years, but I'm still in Oleh Hadash. And that I've now been here 21 years yesterday, 2 days ago, as a matter of fact. And, my kids would call me the American. Their friends would call me an American. I could be here for probably the whole rest of my life, and I would still be the American. My ex-wife's father, my father, my children's grandfather, he's been here since 1957, and he's thought of as an American. Like there's some, you just can't of course I'm an Israeli, and of course when I come to America, I feel Israeli. And, my two oldest children are 17, and they're interviewing with the Army about what they're going to do for their 3 years in the Army, both my daughter and my son. I have two more boys. At one point, we'll have 3 children in the Army at the same time. Whereas my friends in America are trying to, they're having like parties where the kid wears a Columbia sweatshirt or a Barnard sweatshirt, a USC sweatshirt or a UCLA sweatshirt, like a gender reveal party, but for college. You know what I mean? It's like, and it just feels so different. You know what I mean? So different. And so in some ways I'm very Israeli, and yet I'll never really be Israeli in other ways.
And for so long, it was actually a capital crime to convert to Judaism or to convert another to Judaism. So, which explains why there aren't many. But you bring up an interesting subject about the nationality. I'm curious, within the religious community as well, what was it, how accepted did you feel as a part of that community, being A, American, and B, formerly Irish Catholic from Philadelphia?
Look, it definitely, when I did the first conversion, it was a very beautiful ceremony. The term for the law is the halakha, which means the way. And the traditional halakha is very specific about what a convert has to do. And really in the last couple decade or so, the right-wing push, which there seems to be a right-wing push in many religious lives, and that's not, Judaism hasn't been exempt from that. And so, I mean, Judaism has a long history. So there were times when it was very easy to convert to Judaism, and there were times when it was very hard. Right, the book of Ruth we have in the Old Testament, or what we call the Hebrew Bible. Ruth just says, where you will go, I will go. Who you will pray to, I will pray to. And she just declares herself, and she's brought into the tribe. That doesn't happen anymore. And so the most progressive ceremony was very beautiful. But when I started to get more religious and I moved into the conservative community, I understood that part of the traditional, the traditional conversion consists of a Beit Din, which is a religious court. And traditionally, that's 3 judges, rabbis, men. A mikvah, which is like a baptismal pool, for lack of a better word. It's a body of water. It has to be a living body of water. It has to be being fed and being drained. So, like a lake, a true lake is not a mikvah because it's not being fed. But like the Sea of Galilee is, because it has river sources in and river sources out. An ocean is a mikvah. And they build them in buildings that are being fed and being drained, but they're, the size of a very large bathtub or a very small swimming pool. That, the court, and then circumcision for men. And as you noted, and I want full credit for, I've been circumcised 3 times, which is not a religious covenant. It's a fetish. And
oh my God.
I said to the rabbi when he said, you have to do everything all over again, I said, just be careful what you're teaching me. You think you're teaching me religion, and you're teaching me to point sharp, pointy objects and draw blood from my penis. So just know that's what you're doing. So anyway, the first conversion had no Beit Din. I stood in front of the community. I held a Torah scroll in my arms. I was wrapped in a tallis, which is a prayer shawl. And I was asked 5 questions. They were profound questions. Did I come to this decision of free will? Yes. Did I sever any form of religious affiliations? Yes. Would I throw my lot in with the Jewish people? Yes. Now, this was suburban Los Angeles. In 1994, my name was Chris Campbell. If they came for the Jews, I would go, they went that way. I didn't have a beard. I didn't have payas. I didn't have a hat. I didn't have a hat under my hat, So it wasn't exactly like this guy was saying, I throw my lot in with the Jewish people.
Right.
And would I become an active part of the community? Yes. And if ever blessed with children, would I raise them as Jews? Yes. I answered yes to all those questions. As I said, it was very beautiful. It just wasn't very traditionally minded. And so when I did the second conversion, I sat before three judges, 3 rabbis. And they asked me questions. They ascertained that I was serious, and they said yes. And then when I did the third one, I did the same thing all over again. And so between 1 and 2, it seemed like I did something different. And between 2 and 3, I felt a little bit like a political prisoner between 2 groups that didn't want to accept each other. And at that point, someone came up to me and said, if you move to London, the London Beit Din, the religious court in London, would not accept your conversion that you had done in Israel, because they're so specific that they only accept their own rulings. And at that point, I realized, I said to myself, screw them. If, again, using that same attitude, if a diasporic Beit Din, if a group of rabbis that have chosen to live outside the land can't accept me, screw them. And I realized something had shifted. Between the first and the second, and even the second and the third, I kind of accepted that this was what I had to do. But when someone implied that there might be a fourth, I was like, you got to be kidding, And so I think acceptance comes from the outside, and it also comes from the inside.
And hopefully it doesn't require all the circumcisions.
Right. Hopefully there are no more circumcisions.
Because that would be brutal.
Then I'd never make it on the swingers episode. I got to tell you, that's my own challenge. My internal challenge is trying to get a part 2. If the swingers could get a part 2, then Yisrael Campbell and circumcision and religious conversion. I'm just trying. All I'm shooting for here, Meredith, is part 2. Okay,
maybe we will make that happen.
We'll do like a practical. We could do like a practicum of circumcision.
We'll call it The Insight into Adult Circumcision by Yisrael Campbell. You may be onto something. We may have to work on that. I'm sure my listeners have a lot of questions. But,
a practical guide for those curious about adult circumcision.
Yeah, curious about adult circumcision will be the name.
We will bring out a freak. So my show, when it was off Broadway, was called Circumcise Me. So I put a Google alert on the words circumcise me. You would not believe the stories that I pulled up, that were pulled up for me using the words circumcise and me.
That is good. Oh my goodness.
It was scary.
That is scary. Well, before we wrap up, I've just got 2 more questions for you, and they're kind of deep. So I'm not going to lie. This is a hard transition. But
Go for it.
Okay. So I come from a Pentecostal background where you declared your faith with confidence. It was often looks pretty cocky, and there was lots of talk about being assured in your relationship with God. So when I heard you say in a different interview that, I don't know if God hears my prayers, but it's important that I say them, it just really struck me. It struck me as surprising, confusing, and really humble. So I was hoping you could explain what that means in terms of like your relationship with God and that sort of heavenly aspect of acceptance.
Sure. I mean, I think first of all, Judaism is different than Christianity in that it's, what makes a Jew born to a Jewish mother, someone born to a Jewish mother. That's it. Really, that's the end of the story. Or conversion according to whatever sources you're following, right? But what that hasn't spoken to is belief, right? I don't have to make a declaration of belief. Now, Judaism is 3,500 to 5,000 years old. You can pretty much call Pentecostal fervor in religious environments in Judaism. But by and large, many Jews you meet don't believe in God. Many Jews you meet don't have any religious practice whatsoever. There are film festival Jews, there are culinary Jews, there are Israeli Jews, there are Zionist Jews, there are there are religious Jews, there are really religious Jews. But what I loved about Judaism and what I loved was not so much that it was a place where I could have a relationship with God, but it was a place where I could struggle to have a relationship with God. And that's what I loved, that it was a group of people for me, and I keep seeking out those groups that come together that are trying to be in relationship with God. And personally, as you said, many days it feels like my prayers are dribbling down the front of my shirt. You know what I mean? Like I should wear a bib when I pray, They're not going up to heaven. They're kind of like, So that's one aspect. And then there were, just countless examples of the struggle, be in that relationship. There's a great, there's a Hasidic rabbi from the late 1700s, named Levi Yitzhak from Berdichev, the town of Berdichev in the Ukraine. And he is said to have said to the town atheist, the God that you don't believe in, I don't believe in either. And I love that. I love that. When someone comes to me and says, especially in like a recovery aspect, I hate God. I think God killed my little brother. I think God let my girlfriend overdose. I can honestly and full-heartedly say, the God that you don't believe in, I don't believe in either. That's
so
not what I'm
beautiful.
talking about. I'm talking about a source of strength, a source of power, a reassurance, a comfort, going through tough times, going through things, not knowing how I'm going to get through something. Certainly I deal and lean on my humans much more than I lean on, but I also lean on my God. When the fear starts running through my head at 3:00 in the morning, I breathe and I believe that there's a power that's neutral on that. Doesn't care if I'm married or if I'm divorced, if I have a job or I don't, if I'm a little fat or I'm a little skinny, if I'm pigeon-toed or I have hemorrhoids. It doesn't matter. God doesn't give a shit. Quite literally. You know what I mean? That's the power. I don't want to get into like, well, why would God do that for me and not do that for someone else? My head can't get around that power.
Yeah.
God's taking care of me and leaving, thousands of millions of people starving. I believe that's people. People choose, and I'll tell you one more thing and then I'll stop. And if you have one more question, that's great. My parents named me Christopher, which was the Christ bearer. Right. And when I was doing the first conversion, my rabbi said, even the Reform rabbi said, you'll need a Hebrew name. And I said, for when and for what? And he said, at least when you're in synagogue and when you're called to the Torah, it'll be by a Jew is called, I'm Yisrael ben Avraham and Sarah. The Avraham and Sarah are Avraham and Sarah from the Bible. The convert, you're called by your name, son of your parents' name. Traditionally, you're called by your father's name, but that's not what we're here to talk about. So I don't have Jewish parents, so I'm called by the names of the son of Abraham and Sarah, the first Jews. And so he said, choose a name. And I went back and I reread Exodus and Ari ben Canaan was the Paul Newman character. That seemed like a lot of names. Ari ben Canaan ben Avraham seemed a little weighty. And some of the other names the characters were great, but they had really plain names like David. So I went back to him and I had two names. And he looked at them and he said, you can't have the first one. That's a girl's name. And I suppose I'm glad I'm not Daphne today. But the other one was Israel, the whole thing. Like in the end, what was it that grabbed me? The land of Israel, the people Israel, the God of Israel. And so I chose Israel, not even knowing that it means he who wrestles with God.
No.
Right? It's the name.
That's beautiful.
Jacob wrestles with the angel, who some people say is a man, some people say is God. And at the end of the night of wrestling, the angel changes Jacob's name to Israel. And it means he who wrestles with God. And I didn't even know what that meant, but it's such a better name for me than bearer. I am not Christ. I'm not a bearer. I don't bear well, but I wrestle really well.
That's so beautiful.
That's how, yeah.
I think I'm going to have to replay this just for myself. I love so much of what you just shared. That's incredible. I love all of that. And my last question is about relationship with people's relationship with each other. You said, I see God in my life in the connection between people, which of course, as somebody who loves anthropology and culture, I love that sentiment. How do you think that we as individuals in society, in the current day and age, can be more connected to each other?
Well, I think, for me, it really began at the beginning of my recovery from alcoholism and drug addiction. What I was told is I had to access a power greater than myself. And there had been a guy that was kind of guiding me along and showing me how to do this new way of life. And I realized pretty early on that he and I together were a power greater than me. And that's true of me and anyone. So it sets up a paradigm of how I look at another human being. If I'm open to the idea that me and you together are a power greater than myself, then it changes from a human relationship. I believe with my whole heart that there's an energy between us, and that manifests when I interact with another human being, if I'm available to it. I can write it off. I can box you up and put you aside before you've even said hello. But if I'm open to the connection, then I really honestly believe with my heart that there's some energy there that's not there when we're not connected like that. And that was the beginning for me of this accessing a power greater than myself. Now, that's not always a good connection for 3 a.m. because you're asleep and you don't want to be my higher power at 3 o'clock in the morning, And so I've developed this, overarching religious life and spiritual life that can get me through the night. But when I approach a human relationship that way, it's profound, and it's not unlike the words in the Torah where God says, in Deuteronomy, and I don't remember the verse exactly, but God says something to the effect of, I set before you life and death. Choose life that you and your children may live. Like, that's how I explain away the horrible things that happen in the world. It's not fully, and it's not, people act badly. Mm-hmm. They don't choose life. They choose death. They don't think of themselves as choosing death, but they choose selfishness. They choose self-centeredness. They choose, a defect. I'm going to steal this. I'm afraid. I'm going to attack. And that has ramifications. And people that they didn't set out to hurt get hurt. And that's, again, I'm not explaining that away. I'm simply saying, what's the opposite of that? When I focus on the idea that I'm choosing life, I, in each moment, will try and say, what am I bringing to this? And in little ways, I decided many years ago that on Shabbat, I present as a very religious person. I'm not nearly as religious. People think I'm way more religious and therefore closed-minded and right-wing and want to separate than I am. And I decided years and years ago that I was going to say hello to everyone on Shabbat. Now, traditionally on Shabbat, people that keep Shabbat look down on people that don't keep Shabbat. So if someone's running with their Walkman on, that's not permissible. So religious people look away. Someone's getting in their car or taking boxes out of their car, they're breaking Shabbat. The Bible says if you see a stick gatherer, stone him to death, right? So I should stone this guy to death if I'm going to be biblical. Instead, I say hello. And people, my ex-wife used to say, you're going to get people, they're going to look at you, and then the next religious guy is going to spit on them, I'm not responsible for the next religious guy.
Yeah.
And then what happened to me, which was beautiful, was a friend of mine got sick. And he said, so when someone's sick, you ask their mother's name and you pray for them by their mother's name. Instead of you're called to the Torah by your father's name, you pray for someone when they're sick by their mother's name. So I'm Yisrael ben Sarah, if you were praying for me to have a full and complete recovery from something. So I went up to this guy, and he used to be religious and he's not anymore. And he said, I said, what's your mom's name? Because he had written an article that he had cancer. And he said, I don't want people to pray for me that way. I said, okay. And he said, you want to do something for me? I said, I do. He said, when you walk down the street, say hello to people and smile at them. And if they ask you why, and believe me, some people, simply saying hello to someone and smiling at them is cause for concern in many people. He said, tell them that your friend is sick and that this is what you're doing to help him heal.
Oh, that's so
and
beautiful.
So that filled in the rest of the week. Shabbat, I already had my reason because it was Shabbat. I was going to say hello to everyone I saw. And the rest of the week, I was going to say hello to everyone that I saw because Brian was, not feeling well, and we were hoping Brian would feel better. And thank God he has recovered and is in remission and doing well. But I still keep saying hello to people.
That's beautiful, because you and me, we're stronger together.
Yeah, we're connected. That's the beginning of that connection, right? If I don't look at you and I walk by you and I categorize you, I say, that person is poor, that person is homeless, that person is beautiful, that person is successful, that person is rich, that person is, then I've gotten rid of you. I've dehumanized you in a certain way. If I just say hello to you, it's amazing how many people are not expecting a complete stranger to say hello to them. And it's amazing their reaction. They stop and they smile and they say hi.
I love that.
And the traditional Jewish greeting is Shalom Aleichem. And the traditional Muslim greeting is Salam Aleichem, which means peace upon you. And the answer is the reverse. I say Shalom Aleichem, and you say Aleichem Shalom. I say peace upon you, and you say upon you peace. And I'll tell you, when a Jew in Israel, in Jerusalem, says it to a Muslim, they're even more shocked.
Oh, I can only imagine. I love your perspective on the interconnectedness of everyone that you meet and the power of that. That's so incredible. I do think we should strategize for some kind of part 2. As we wrap up, where can people stay in touch with you? Where can they find you? And do you have...
So the simplest way, I have a media empire like that rivals the Murdochs. It's like Fox, but I like to keep it on the down low and just give an email address. So Yisrael Campbell, Israel with a Y, Campbell like the soup @gmail.com. And then we'll plug you into the empire later.
I love that. That's beautiful. Well, thank you again, my friend. This has been incredible.
Thank you.
That's a wrap. Woo.
Thank you.
Hey, you're still here. That's awesome. I hope to see you next week too. I talk with the most interesting people that you've probably never heard of. Most of them are a paradox and bring an opportunity for you to grow as a person. So if you like great, meaningful entertainment, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications.